Good morning, conference, and welcome to Brighton. Our annual conference is the centrepiece of our democratic process, where we can come together to debate and discuss and to learn from each other. Education can, at times, be quite isolating. We spend the vast majority of our working time with children, and time to meet with each other in school has become increasingly pressured. There's often not much time for us to meet, to discuss, to engage collectively as educators. So please make the most of those opportunities that conference provides to do those things. If you are new to conference, it can be quite confusing, but you will find other delegates helpful and patient, and I hope you'll extend that patience to me as I try my best to chair. It has been an historic year for our union. A month ago, 1,200 of us were at our special conference to debate how we move forward with active recruitment of support staff members. For too long, our sector has been divided, and I am proud to be part of a union that stands for all educators. We work together in our classrooms, teachers and support staff side by side in harmony for the benefit of our students. And now we will stand side by side in our union, 500,000 members strong and growing, as we do what we must to save education. I am not someone who always wanted to be a teacher. I had no idea what I wanted to do when I finished my A-levels, but generally felt that I'd be all right as long as I didn't end up back in a school. But in my mid-20s, having worked in and been pretty disillusioned by the music industry, I had a change of heart and applied to do a PGCE in music. I was sent for a day to experience a secondary school music department, and it's no exaggeration to say that what I saw there that day changed my life. Music was everywhere, and it was participatory. It was valued deeply by the children. It was of an incredible standard. It was creative. There was no gatekeeping, and it was fun. It was a living, breathing thing, and it was beautiful. I ended up doing my placement in that school, and then I got a job in the same department as an NQT, and later when the head of department left mid-year, I took on that role. It's not the last time I've had to take on a role mid-year when somebody left early. It was a different time before the financial crisis, and there was freedom in the curriculum for huge amounts of practical work. Arts subjects in Key Stage 3 weren't limited to an hour a week or placed on a carousel, and the 9 forms of 27 that were used to teach most subjects were split into 12 groups of 20 or 21 for arts lessons. We could run multiple GCSE classes alongside a BTEC at Key Stage 4, and both music and music technology at A-level. Nearly all music lessons had a practical, creative aspect. Outside lessons, there were orchestras, jazz bands, choirs, string, wind and brass ensembles, African drumming groups, with extracurricular clubs running every single day of the week. On Thursday evenings, we ran a community music hub with a parent choir and instrumental lessons for adults. Over 450 children had one-to-one music lessons in the school each week, delivered by an enormous team of peripatetic teachers. Many of these were subsidised, some fully paid for by the departmental budget when circumstances at home were too difficult. Every year we would take the whole of Year 7 to a concert at the Barbican. All 240 children with a huge team of staff coming out of school for what was, for most kids, their first ever experience of live orchestral music. But the main thing was the student-led music. We viewed ourselves not just as music teachers, but as facilitators, opening up the department practice rooms well before school in the morning, during break and lunch, and well after the end of the day for kids to practice and engage in collective music making. Each summer, Year 10 would run a music festival in the playground where all the bands could play. Exam results were excellent, but we never really worried about them. We measured the success of the department on engagement. How many children were actively engaged in music making? How many were taking an active part in the myriad school groups, the clubs, the concerts? What was the quality of the music making? How many were enjoying themselves? And then, in 2010, after the financial crisis, the coalition government was elected, Michael Gove and Nick Gibb entered the DFE, and we entered an era of austerity. Not just austerity of spending, but austerity of imagination, austerity of creativity, austerity of pedagogy, of ambition, and of joy. Gove's EBAC and Progress 8, alongside austerity, ushered in an era of savage cuts to the arts subjects. Students were actively discouraged from pursuing the arts. GCSE and A-level entries fell. The syllabus was narrowed, and opportunities for genuine creativity were limited. Lesson time was taken from the arts to increase time in core subjects, and students were limited in their options at GCSE. Vocational qualifications were discouraged and were restricted in content. There is a famous Nietzsche aphorism that hung on the wall of my classroom for many years: without music, life would be a mistake. Well, if it's true of Life Conference, then it's certainly true of education. Of course, it wasn't just the arts nor schools which suffered under austerity. Every aspect of social fabric relating to children was hit, with cuts to Sure Start, nursery provision, youth clubs, child and adolescent mental health services, social services, and the cost of a university education passed on to students in the form of loans which trapped graduates in decades-long debt. My school was highly unionised, with a very active group and a brilliant school rep, Niall O'Connor. In many ways, we held out against the worst excesses of austerity. It is still a very active school, and last week the 95 members passed the 50% turnout threshold less than an hour into an online indicative ballot. My first involvement as a rep happened in strange circumstances. The then NUT secretary, Julie Davis, had been suspended by the local authority, and Niall had gone to deal with that. It was the end of term, and Niall called me to explain the situation. I said, "What would you like me to do?" And it was decided that between the children leaving and the end of the term staff meeting, I was to get all the members together, explain the situation, take a show of hands, and then go and wish the head well for the holidays, whilst informing him that we'd be going on strike action to defend our elected representative on the other side of the holidays. And sometime later, I took over from Niall and Julie as the local secretary for Haringey. But in the interim, I learned so much from them: how long and slow the process can be to win rights, and how quickly they can be taken away if not defended vehemently. How casework can lead to collective wins as well as individual. How to build activity and engagement in the membership. When to double down and when to take the win. How to level the playing field when dealing with head teachers. There is still a print which still hangs by the door as you leave the Haringey NEU office, and it says "Speak truth to power," and it serves as a very useful reminder and a summary of what I learned from Niall and Julie. Conference, we're now nearly 2 years into a Labour administration. We have had the curriculum and assessment review and the publication of the recent education white paper, Every Child Achieving and Thriving. The aims of the white paper in many ways are noble. Many of the ideas within it are welcome and things we have been campaigning for. We want more inclusive schools. We want more children accessing the support they need in mainstream settings. We want a broader curriculum. We want easier systems for accessing support for students with SEND. We want enrichment entitlements for all children. But we also know that the funding assigned for the reforms to send equate to half a teaching assistant on average for each primary school. £13,000 per primary school will not deliver the seismic shift we need in order to get to grips with a SEND crisis that has rumbled on for years. £13,000 will be swallowed by yet another unfunded pay award, with the government once again expecting schools to find efficiency savings. The DFE has suggested savings could be made by cutting assistant head and teaching assistant roles. How on earth can schools deliver increased inclusion and a radically different vision for SEND education if they are also expected to cut the leaders who will be leading on this work and the vital support staff who will be delivering the specialised support on the ground? We have the highest class sizes in Europe. More than 1 million children are now taught in classes of 31 or more, the highest figure this century. And that's against falling roles nationally. Pay for teachers and support staff has fallen in real terms. And we know that the STRB report is on Bridget Phillipson's desk, and schools are once again approaching a new financial year unable to budget with confidence. A partially funded 6.5% raise for teachers over 3 years, as suggested by government, does nothing to deal with the recruitment and retention issues in teaching. And with inflation likely to rise again, the pay award risks being woefully inadequate and out of date before it's even implemented. To educate fully cannot simply be a didactic pursuit. It must also be an act of love. But conference, for too long, that love has been weaponized against us. Nobody goes into education for the money. But working dignity is the least we deserve. For too long, educators have had to make do and mend in a broken system. For too long, we've propped up a failing sector starved of proper investment. We know the stories of educators buying the pens and paper that schools can no longer afford. I have spent weekends trawling charity shops and jumble sales for knackered old guitars I might be able to fix up and restring for classroom use. We've also seen the devastating impact of child poverty in our classrooms. We know that there are now 1 in 5 schools running food banks. How can it be that in the 6th largest economy on earth in 2026, child poverty is rising? 4.5 million of our children now live in poverty, an average of 9 in every class of 30. Yet governments repeatedly espouse education as the means of social mobility whilst slashing funding. The White Paper talks at length about the responsibilities of schools in low-income communities, the need to raise standards and improve attendance. But why do low-income communities exist? We need much wider societal, economic and political solutions alongside educational reform. In a G20 report last year, Nobel laureate economist Joseph Stiglitz warned of an inequality emergency. The report points out that inequality of this magnitude is not inevitable. It is the direct result of political choices. Financial deregulation, weakening labour protections and privatisation all aid rising inequality, as does cutting corporate and top income tax rates. We live with a sense of near economic permacrisis and rampant inequality, yet the answers from the political establishment always seem to be the same. We cannot expect educators to stem the tide of rising inequality and child poverty whilst governments relentlessly and blindly pursue the very economic policies that create these conditions. Without funding, we know that no matter how noble the aims of the White Paper might be, they will not materialise on the ground. Schools are running on empty. So our message to government must be clear. Fund our schools, invest in educators, invest in our children, invest in our communities. Funding education is not a bureaucratic issue, it is a moral one. If we are to save education, austerity must end. Not in words, but in deeds. If we measure government in deeds and not words, we must apply the same standard to ourselves. You will, I'm sure this week, hear that the words on the page matter, and that's an early one for those of you playing conference bingo there. And it's true, the words on the page do matter. But they only matter if they're matched with deeds, with action in our workplaces, our staff rooms, our classrooms, up and down the country. We must be the driving force in the fight to save education. We must unite and galvanise our members to demand an education system that works for the young people we educate. And I know that we can do it. We are experts in challenging apathy. We're experts in changing minds, experts in encouragement, and in showing what is possible if you just keep trying. And we're experts in these things because we do them every single day as educators. So we must build the ballot. We must build belief and resolve in our members. We must set out a vision for education worth fighting for, and we must keep going. Education is under attack, and we are in a fight for the soul of our schools. Asserting our collective strength and our professional autonomy is key to ensuring that we can deliver an education system that serves the needs of our children and young people in the 21st century. It's why I've been so proud to stand on so many picket lines this year with members up and down the country fighting back. When our members strike, they do so as a last resort with absolute resolve and moral clarity. It's an honour to stand with them. And any member taking action in their school is doing so for all of us. Every dispute, no matter how small, is part of a much larger strategy to win education back for us, the people who work in it. Because where members stand together, things change for the better. I want to pay particular tribute to members fighting back against the worst excesses of the failed multi-academy trust system. Particularly members at the Arthur Terry Learning Partnership Schools. Arthur Terry Partnership Schools in the Midlands, where the trust was top slicing almost 30% of all funding from its schools. And that dispute showed that where we fight, we build, and where we build, we win. It showed what's possible when reps take charge and instill courage, belief, and unshakable resolve in the membership. And that dispute showed that when we talk about our schools, we mean our schools. Too often, our education system has treated children as problems to be managed rather than minds to be cultivated. We measure success by compliance, speed, standardization, while creativity, curiosity, and imagination are treated as optional extras or, at worst, distractions. And this approach was never adequate, not for our children, not for our society, certainly not for the future we're asking those children to inherit. We live in a world defined by rapid change, technological, social, environmental. The jobs our children will do may not yet exist, but we know that the problems that they will face will not have neat, pre-written answers. In such a world, the most valuable skills are not memorization or obedience, but critical thinking, creativity, adaptability, and moral imagination. And yet, in a world of maths-mandated curricula, high-stakes accountability, age-related expectations, league tables, and standardized testing, these are precisely the capacities our current systems are least equipped to nurture. Creativity is often misunderstood as something reserved for artists, but creativity is simply the ability to think differently, to see connections, to imagine alternatives, to solve problems where the path is unclear. Scientists rely on creativity. Engineers rely on creativity. Doctors, teachers, citizens in a democracy all rely on creativity. And when we narrow learning to what can be easily tested, we teach children a dangerous lesson that only one answer matters, that risk is failure, and that their own ideas are secondary to authority. Over time, this doesn't produce excellence, it produces fear. A progressive education system recognises that mistakes are not failures, they are evidence of thinking. Critical thinking isn't about cynicism or rebellion, it's about discernment. Asking why, evaluating evidence, recognising bias, and understanding complexity. A society that discourages critical thinking raises citizens who are vulnerable to misinformation, manipulation, and fear. A society that encourages it raises citizens capable of participation, responsibility, ethical judgment. And education must therefore move beyond rote learning towards dialogue, inquiry, and reflection. Students shouldn't learn merely what to think, but they should learn how to think, and how to disagree with respect, openness, curiosity, and reason, like we'll all be doing this week, won't we? Won't we? Every advance in human history began as an act of imagination, a different way of living, governing, healing, or understanding the world. How can we expect children to build a better world in the future if they cannot imagine one? Three years ago, I spoke at conference on an amendment about restoring the arts in schools, arguing for the abolition of the disastrous EBAC. And that evening, I met with the mover and seconder of the original motion, Victoria and Ralph, in the pub with a colleague, Chris Walters, from the Musicians' Union, who's here today. At the time, I was on the national executive with Sarah Kilpatrick, and I knew that she had campaigned as an art teacher for similar things over a long period of time. So Sarah and I put together a list of organisations who we wanted to work with, and we set to work. Sometime later, the Arts and Minds campaign was born, and we now have 50 organisations signed up. Unions, charities, educational organisations, campaign groups, companies, and third sector organisations from the arts world, all meeting regularly, campaigning, and working together to pressure the government to restore the arts in schools. Picasso famously said that every child is an artist. The problem is how to remain an artist once he grows up. And for too long, politicians have disparaged the arts and their transformative power, limiting access for working class children. We must stand for universal access for all children to the arts, not just to experience arts as an observer, but to participate fully in expressing themselves through art. The most eagle-eyed amongst you may notice that my tie today, and a few people did notice, features a William Morris design. William Morris was one of England's first socialists and the founder of the arts and crafts movement. He was a designer, artist, writer, poet, and social activist. It was also pointed out to me this morning that he was also a bit of a bastard. But well, you know, we'll leave that there. The Waltham Forest NEU banner bears a quote of his which says, "I do not want art for a few any more than education for a few or freedom for a few." This is the universalism we aspire to and demand. Beauty and the right to artistic expression should never be the preserve of the wealthy. Arts and Minds has had some success. The government have scrapped the EBAC and stated the need for a broader curriculum offer with the arts included. However, bursaries for initial teacher training in arts subjects have been cut. Teacher training targets are missed year on year, with only 27% of the target met in music in 2023 and a 20% drop in applications this year. Meanwhile, the culture of disparaging the arts in public discourse continues unabated. Even this year, the Shadow Education Secretary stated that she would cut what she called dead-end creative arts courses at university because they do not offer value for money. How do we recruit more teachers in the arts if we cut the very courses they rely on? And how do we put a price on a child's emotional response to great art? How do we put a price on expression of the human condition? How can we quantify the inexplicable beauty of a Mozart melody line, our collective joy in singing or dancing together, the wide-eyed wonder of great storytelling through film, or the visceral, heart-stopping trauma in Tracy Emin's work? For far too long, we have been dictated to by Philistine politicians who know the price of everything and the value of nothing. Politicians like to speak of standards in education, but rarely do they bother to define this term. Instead, it's become a lazy, catch-all euphemism used as justification for a rigid, narrow, regressive, and unimaginative curriculum designed to be easily tested. An education system built on punitive behaviour systems, compliance, high-stakes accountability, and relentless testing, squeezing learners into predetermined pathways and ever narrower boxes. A child-centred education system doesn't lower standards, it redefines them. It recognises that education is not just preparation for life, it is life. So let's place children, not systems or statistics, at the centre. The true measure of an education system is not how efficiently it produces answers, but by how powerfully it teaches young people to ask meaningful questions. It is no coincidence that the loss of much critical thinking, creativity, and imagination from our curriculum has coincided with the political situation we find ourselves in. In the age of social media and AI, never has it been more crucial to teach critical analysis of sources. Never has knowing which questions to ask been more vital. Our children are overwhelmed with information relentlessly through screens. They are targeted by algorithms which prioritize engagement and clicks above all else, leading to increasingly extreme and harmful content. Research shows that soon after creating social media profiles, girls are bombarded with unrealistic body images and content relating to self-harm and suicidal ideation. Boys are exposed to the influences of the manosphere, peddling a sick, toxic interpretation of masculinity rooted in extreme misogyny, incel culture, and monetary greed. And in the past decade, rates of anxiety, self-harm, and loneliness amongst children have surged. Studies link excessive social media use to poor sleep, low self-esteem, and rising depression. But once again, it's us in education who are asked to bear the burden of this. But through our Big Tech's Little Victims campaign, we are leading the way, campaigning for vital reforms to protect children. School-level phone bans and media and digital literacy education are welcome, but will never be enough. The government must deal with the issue at source and begin to get to grips with the tech giants who monopolise, commodify and monetize our children's attention. The dawn of this post-truth age of online fake news and echo chamber politics has aided the rise of the far right and right-wing populists across the world. We know that here at home, Reform are leading in the polls. Populists have always sought to weaponize the legitimate grievances of people who have been forgotten and abandoned by the political establishment. People who've been chewed up and spat out by decades of neoliberal economic consensus. The social contract of the mid-20th century has been smashed open, and in the cracks, the weeds of racism, prejudice, and hatred grow. We, as trade unionists, know instinctively that an injury to one is an injury to all. That when they come for migrants or Muslims, disabled people or the trans community, we must stand together in response. It's why the equalities work of the union is so important. Ensuring that the voices of our women members, black members, LGBT+ members and disabled members are amplified. Ensuring that equality is embedded not just in our union, but into our schools, our colleges, our communities. It's why we know that change lies in unity, not division. Last year, I spoke on counter-demonstrations in Epping and Islington and on Whitehall against hotel protests and Tommy Robinson's marches. I know that many of you were and still are out on the streets opposing the far right wherever they peddle their hatred against migrants. We must reach into those communities where the far right organise and say loud and clear that migrants are not to blame, Muslims are not to blame, trans people are not to blame. People are right to be angry, but we should never punch down. The enemies of working people in this country do not arrive by small boat, they arrive by mega yacht and private jet. On Saturday, I was immensely proud to march with thousands of NEU members. And hundreds of thousands of others in London on the Together March. We can be immensely proud of the leading role our union has played in bringing together so many trade unions, organisations, politicians, musicians, artists, and hundreds of thousands of people from all over the country to stand together against the far right. Over 500,000 people on the streets saying loudly and unequivocally that migrants are not to blame, refugees are not to blame. We refuse to be divided by hate. We are black, we are white, we are gay, straight, cis, trans. We are Christian, Muslim and Jew, and we are together. Unity is back, hope is back, and love is back. Marching alone will not be enough. We need to ensure that we take our message back into our workplaces, into our communities, our families even, and say that we will never be divided by hatred. The last year has shown us that while the challenges we face at home are clear, the forces against us are global. We've seen the continuation of the horrors of genocide in Gaza, the war in Ukraine rolling on, the USA and Israel's war against Iran now engulfing the Middle East, conflicts in Sudan and Somalia, the situation in Venezuela, and the continuation and massive escalation of an illegal blockade against the people of Cuba. The forces of right-wing populism and imperialism are on the rise across the world. And if the forces against us are global, then our movement's response must be global. Our commitment to peace and education as universal human rights must be global. Our solidarity and resolve can know no borders. That's why I'm so proud of the work our union does internationally. I am proud of the work we do with our sister unions as part of Education International. I'm proud of the refugee solidarity work carried out by members in Calais and Dunkirk, but also in classrooms up and down the country. We are honoured today by the presence of so many education trade unionists from across the world who have joined us here. Just over a year ago, I spoke at the Australian Education Unions Conference in Melbourne. I was speaking about the impact of school cuts on our classrooms and cautioning about the impact of academisation. At the time, Australia was preparing for a general election, and Peter Dutton, a right-wing populist, Toy Town Trump character running on a predominantly anti-migrant platform, was leading in the polls. A culture war was swirling around education, but the AEU managed to get the government to agree a new funding settlement for schools. The Labour administration held on in the election, and Dutton lost his seat. I think the parallels are fairly clear, and there is certainly much we can learn from our colleagues down under. In October, I was on the union's delegation to Cuba, and there we saw firsthand how an education system can be run with children at the centre despite immense challenges. How a child's unique talents can be nurtured in a collective system with tenderness and care as guiding principles. A philosophy in education and in society based on cooperation and collaboration rather than competition. We stand with our Cuban colleagues at this difficult time as they resist the intensification of the USA's illegal trade blockade against their country and its people. We're also joined today by Esmail Abdi from the Iran Teachers Trade Association. Esmail was jailed more than once by the Iranian regime, spent over 7 years in prison and went on hunger strike for trade union rights. And we are honoured to be joined by such a committed teacher trade unionist. We stand with the educators of Iran at a time when the Iranian people have faced violence from the regime inside and bombardment from the USA and Israel outside. And of course, on Wednesday, we will be hearing from Tia Mills from the National Education Association, our sister union from the United States, who will speak about trade union and educator resistance to Trump. In January, I travelled to Jordan with Education International and a group of education trade union leaders from around the world. We were due to attend an event in Ramallah in Palestine for the International Day of Education as guests of the General Union of Palestinian Teachers. It was a graduation ceremony for women teachers who had taken part in a professional development course partially funded by us and other Education International unions. Unfortunately, we were prevented from attending by the Israeli military. We were crossing the border via the King Hussein Bridge, but were stopped at the last checkpoint on the Israeli side. We were interrogated. We had our passports confiscated, our phones searched. We were held for several hours, denied entry to occupied Palestine, and then forcibly returned to Jordan. Some of our colleagues who experienced this with me are here with us today, and we are honoured to be joined by such inspirational leaders of our movement from around the world. I would like to pay particular tribute to David Edwards, General Secretary of Education International, who led that delegation and who is here with us today. And to Saeed Erzakat, General Secretary of our sister union, the General Union of Palestinian Teachers. Your commitment to education as a force for peace in the face of such oppression is incredible and inspirational. The unending resilience and hope of the Palestinian people is an inspiration to the world. Academic freedom, trade union rights, and international solidarity are not privileges, they are fundamental rights protected under international law. Attempts by the Israeli regime to intimidate and silence the global trade union movement will not succeed. We cannot allow efforts to isolate the Palestinians from the international community to work. It is our duty as a movement to stand with the oppressed, to amplify the voices of the silenced, to shine a light on injustice. Our solidarity recognizes no borders. We will not be intimidated into silence. And as Pablo Neruda said, you can cut all the flowers, but you cannot stop spring from coming. And Saeed, probably up there somewhere, I say again, Saeed, what I said to you that day. One day, members of our two great unions will meet together to promote peace and education for all in a free Palestine. In September, after one of the national marches for Palestine, I walked down Whitehall to Parliament Square, where hundreds of people, mostly over 60, were holding signs in support of Palestine Action and waiting patiently to be arrested. To see the amount of people who were prepared to put their own liberty on the line for the right to protest and the right to dissent was profound. The quiet dignity and steely resolve of those protesters, including some of our own retired members and people in this room today, will stay with me for a long time. There, in the shadow of Parliament and under the watchful gaze of statues of Mahatma Gandhi, Millicent Fawcett and Nelson Mandela, the police systematically arrested protester after protester over several hours. There was a deeply moving moment as a group of women, lying together on the grass, holding hands, began to sing, "We Shall Overcome," as the police moved in to arrest them. And conference, those brave women did overcome. The High Court ruled in February that the government's prescription of Palestine Action as a terrorist organisation was unlawful. But attacks on the right to protest go on, and we must vehemently defend the right to dissent peacefully as a cornerstone of our freedom and democracy. We must never allow ourselves to be cowed in our defence of peace and humanity. We must never be scared to raise our voice against injustice or to stand with the oppressed. Before I finish, I want to give some quick thanks. I mentioned earlier Niall and Julie, and I wouldn't be where I am today were it not for them. Despite his retirement, Niall is still a source of wisdom and support for which I am immensely grateful. Sadly, Julie died almost 3 years ago. I was honoured to speak at her funeral, and one of her sons is here today. I still occasionally go to phone her for advice or to share something funny and remember that she's gone. I still miss her, but her sharp wit, steely resolve, kindness, and phenomenal ability to speak truth to power live on. I want to thank everyone in my home district of Haringey, FA, Steph, Becca and Naomi, who've taken on all the casework this last year. The massive network of officers and school reps we have built there, and the retired members who still show incredible commitment to the union, helping so much with the day-to-day running of the district. The nature of this role means we work with lots of people, but it would be remiss of me not to single out my predecessor, running mate for this role, driving force behind Arts and Minds, and now Deputy General Secretary Sarah Kilpatrick. I'd also like to thank Vice President Deborah Beale for her support and Joe Flynn for his tireless work, Vice Chair and Conference Committee. Joe will also be Deborah's Vice President. There are hundreds of staff who make all this possible, but I would particularly like to thank David Kimber and the conference team, without whom none of this would happen. I must also thank Anne Swift, who's my conference secretary / minder this week. Anne was president of the NUT a decade ago in 2016 when I first became a local secretary, and the 2016 conference was here. She was chair for the special conference that decided on the historical merger that formed the NEU, and I couldn't have a more experienced, calmer head helping me this week. I want to thank and apologise to my children, Caleb and Etty, who are not here today, but are enjoying a well-deserved holiday. I know that sharing dad with a role like this isn't easy. I know that I can be absent. I can find it difficult to switch off from work. And I know that the time you sometimes spend sitting in the back of conferences or out on marches or waiting for some online meeting to finish so that we can play is not what you'd choose to be doing. But everything I do is because I want to give you and your friends an education system that equips you with the tools you need to build the world that you want to live in. One that ensures your happiness, your safety, and that celebrates your unique personalities as well as your achievements. An education which teaches you how to think and not what to think. One which sees you as the incredible people you are, rather than as mere future units of economic production or data points on a chart, and one which recognises that it's more important to know which questions to ask than to know the answer. I should probably say at this point that some of my son's teachers are here today, but, you know, no pressure. Kids, thank you for being patient with me. You both teach me so much more than I could ever teach you. Lastly, and most importantly, conference, I want to thank all of you for being here, giving up your holiday to debate, to engage in setting the direction of our union, to discuss the ways in which we can save education. In his book, The Disappearance of Childhood, the theorist Neil Postman said, "Children are the living messages we send to a time we will not see." As educators, we must ask ourselves, what is the message we want to send to that time? Conference, I want us to send a message of hope. Because despite the many challenges we face, I have hope. A better education system is possible, and that means that a better world is possible. And I believe this because I believe in the transformative power of education. I believe in the power of organised workers. I believe in the young people we work with every day. And I believe in us. I have hope in us. So in the words of the song, sung by our movement, from the Charleston cigar strikers of South Carolina in 1945, through the civil rights movement in the US, to those brave women in Parliament lying on the ground waiting peacefully to be arrested. Deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. Thank you.